So I left a company that was paying me extremely well. It was a job that was awesome. The company was great. The product was awesome. And I decided to leave and go work at a friend's startup that paid way less. And Verifone actually ended up getting acquired by NASDAQ probably like 5 years ago for like $2 billion. Shortly after that acquisition happened, I was going out for like dinner with a couple of friends. They thought I was like devastated that I hadn't stayed with this company, right? Like that was a massive acquisition, right? Like life-changing amount of money for a lot of people that were in that company. It wasn't like I never would needed to work again sort of thing. But if I'd stayed with that company and I kind of like saw it through, it would have been a big payday, right? But I never regret it for a second.
All right, that's my guest today, Jason Oakley. Jason is a very experienced product marketer turned coach, turned consultant, turned creator. He's the founder of Productive PMM, where he helps founding product marketers and early stage product marketing teams build out the function from scratch. And he also runs Demo Dash, which is his agency that supports Navattic customers, helping them tell their stories through interactive demos. If you're new here, I'm Andrew, and this is a show where I get to have candid conversations with my guests about some of the toughest moments in their careers and what they learned from them. And that's what we got into with Jason. We explore the toughest feedback he's had to deliver as a manager. We talked about his battles with imposter syndrome, and we talked about how he approached one of the toughest career decisions he's ever had to make. It's enough from me. Let's go ahead and hear from him.
So I'm from St. John's, Newfoundland. So Newfoundland, most easterly province in Canada, and St. John's capital city. I think it's probably like 300,000, 250,000 people. Newfoundland's probably like 500,000 in total. So it's not like I came from a small town, right? St. John's in the grand scheme of things, especially Newfoundland, like it's a city. But definitely like Newfoundland is kind of like that small town feel. Most people, if they've ever met a Newfoundlander, they kind of say like, they're friendly and it has a small town vibe. So anyways, grew up there. I was always a pretty entrepreneurial guy. I was like an athlete, a decent athlete in school. I played basketball, I played golf, but I definitely always had like an entrepreneurial kind of spark. I was a paper boy when I was a kid, always the kid on the street who was wrangling up the lemonade stand and all that kind of stuff. And then when I went to university, so I went to university in Newfoundland. Like I only moved to Toronto about 10 years ago. Well, like 12 or 13, I lose track, but I'm new-ish to Ontario. But yeah, I was born and raised in St. John's, but when I went to university at Memorial, I started a business there and I had this publication that I created called Recess. And it was like, anyone who's listening to this, who's ever picked up a coffee news like that, it's almost like you find it in coffee shops. It's a 17 by 11 inch piece of paper folded in half. And it's all just activities, crosswords, Sudokus, horoscopes, all this stuff. Just something to do while you're drinking coffee. So anyways, I created a campus version of that. It was called Recess. And that was like my first real kind of business that I created. And it was cool. Won me a couple of scholarships. I got to go to like a global entrepreneur competition. So I got the like entrepreneurial bug for sure when I was in university. And yeah, that kind of like stayed through. I worked for my uncle's small company when I left university, and then eventually got into SaaS. But yeah, like as a kid, I had a great childhood. Like I said, played sports, just kind of normal kind of upbringing.
Dude, that's cool, man. It's funny. One of the questions I usually ask is what some of people's first jobs are. And usually lead into the question, I'll say, did you have a paper route growing? And nobody ever has a paper route except for you. You're the first one.
Yeah, for sure. I remember I had like at the earliest I could get it. We were pretty normal middle class kind of family, but it was, if I wanted, my first cell phone, it's interesting today, like my first cell phone, I bought it for myself. You know what I mean? These days it's different, right? But growing up, like I always...
Do you have to save up for it? Like your parents said, you got to put aside money.
I worked at a grocery store.
6 months or a year or something.
Like I worked all the time. Yeah. I remember I played like I said, I played basketball, and I was a pretty good basketball player, but I never played my senior year. I had a job. I couldn't go to practice and just kind of chose to work. But yeah, like I always just kind of had a job because my sister too, my sister was 4 years older than me. And I remember when she was like, 15, she had her first job, I think. And she was working for like $5 an hour at a clothing store. And, I was just kind of surrounded by that. And it was always like, if you want money to buy stuff, you got to work for it. So that kind of, I'm sure that had some impact on me, but I always look back on that with like pride that I like, paid. If I wanted something, my first car, I bought it myself, stuff like that.
And where does that come from? Like, what did your parents do?
Mom and dad were both they worked in in healthcare, but basically mom was a secretary for a receptionist at a pastoral care department. She worked with priests and basically the department in the hospital where if you were needed to speak with someone from whatever religion you were, say if you were, on your deathbed or something like that. So that was the department she worked in. And then dad he worked in the kitchen. So basically dad had a career he started first working on, I think passenger ships in the kitchens there, as a line chef, and then eventually moved into healthcare, and he worked in the central kitchen in the hospital. And then eventually, there was a stint there where he went and worked as a first responder. So when the ambulance came in with people, he would be the one who kind of receives them, gets them to the OR, and then eventually made his way into the dietary department and would help people with meal plans and stuff like that. But yeah, that's what they did.
And so how do you start to get into SaaS? What's the step there? Because it's really interesting, right? So you're in college, you've got, it's funny, newspapers are sort of a theme, at least in the first part of your journey, right? You got the newspaper paper route, and then you've got you've kind of got your own publishing system there in school. Tell me how you start to get into this world that you're in now, the tech marketing world.
So I was always pretty interested in I definitely never thought of the word SaaS until I maybe entered my first SaaS company. But I remember with
SaaS is the worst word. That's the lamest word in the world, isn't it? Who's excited about that word? You're 22 and wide-eyed. You're oh, SaaS.
I remember the first time I heard SaaS, I was I don't know what that means, and I don't care.
It sounds like something I want to get rid of.
With Recess, I remember at the time, this was back when QR codes weren't anything, QR codes. But I took a QR code. There was this company, it was called Sticky Bits. The first time I'd ever seen a QR code. And this is a while ago. I graduated from university in 2010, maybe? Anyways, it was before that. But basically I put a QR code in my little print publication, and then I would have stuff that you would get if you scanned it. And then I had I tried augmented reality in it at one point. I was messing around with all these things. So that was I had an interest in technology and all that. But I remember the first time how I got into SaaS is when I left. I tried to take Recess and make it way bigger. So I tried to franchise it out. I worked with this web developer, and I tried to create this publishing tool where I'd have the content. I'd have all these different franchisees around. They would sell their own individual ads. They could pop it into this little publishing tool. So I spent a ton of money. Almost all that money I got from those scholarships, I spent on this website that went absolutely nowhere. And it was an interesting learning because I always look back at I tried to take something that was an idea that worked and a business that I probably could have sold to someone or maybe grew it a little bit slower. But I tried to pump a bunch of money into it and turn it into this. It needed to be bigger because otherwise it was not impressive. And so and it totally just killed the whole thing. Couldn't even give it away. I ended up, So that was a learning for sure. But then I left. I was doing that a little bit after I had left university. That was my first job as I went out and did my own thing. And then I went to work for my uncle, and I started teaching myself how to build websites. And I was doing that a little bit with his company. His company was actually, they used to do back home. They did when you call a company and they put you on hold and you hear music and someone talking, that was his business. And he grew it from the ground up, an entrepreneur. Wow. Through and through. And anyways, I went there. There's a time where if you called a business or a hotel in St. John's, Newfoundland, you'd hear me on hold music and just saying ads for their specials and stuff like that.
Oh, while you wait? While you wait, check out.
Yeah, he had a little recording studio. I went in and I'd record the ads, and then I'd go this little thumb drive over to their hotel and I'd plug it in and download it onto their on hold machine. But anyways, I convinced him. I was hey, we should start building websites for people. And then I built a couple of websites for people. But eventually I kind of realized there was no real future for me in his business. I had two cousins, and I was clear he was going to hand it down to them. And so then I had a friend who was working at a company called Verifant, which was a SaaS company, capital SaaS. They were just the big kind of tech company in Newfoundland. And I threw my hat in the ring. I was hey, you think you can give me a job? And I got a job as an AE at an enterprise SaaS company. I just lucked into it. And that's how I got into it. And then the rest was that was it. I've been in it ever since.
This episode is presented by Navattic. If you've been following me or you're a fan of this show, you know how bullish I am on the interactive demo space and how much I love the Navattic team. Done a ton of stuff with them over the years, and they just dropped a bunch of new features that are really exciting. First, they've got a new template library. You can choose from a bunch of pre-made templates that have the most common demo use cases and all of the best practices built in, help you go 0 to 1 in a few seconds. If you're not sure what to build, they also have a new AI storyboard generator. It's exactly how it sounds. You drop in a website URL or some copy or a landing page, whatever you've got, it reads the information, pulls out the key sections, and then builds a working product demo for you in a couple minutes. And after you've built your demo, you'll probably want to use your data as part of your go-to-market approach. They've got a bunch of plug-and-play demo playbooks where you can send that interaction data to your CRM. You can use it to trigger alerts, all kinds of good stuff. It's actually a bunch of the things that my team built manually. It took us forever when I was in-house, so I love this. And after you've built your demo, if you need to make any adjustments, if you're displaying numbers or data as part of that, they have a new table AI feature, which helps you to clean up that data in a more conversational way and at scale in just a few seconds. They have made it so stinking easy to use your product as your marketing tool without needing an engineer or heavy design work. You can get started with all of this in their free plan. Check it out at navattic.com/value to get started. That's navattic.com/value. This episode of the show is presented by Appcues. If you work in product-led growth, you know how important activating and engaging new accounts is. Turning those new accounts into active users is critical to your success in a product-led environment, and it's typically why activated accounts is a North Star metric for many growth teams. Certainly why my team spent years working on our onboarding experience when I was in-house, both at Wistia and at Postscript. And that's why I'm so excited that they're sponsoring the show. They are just as passionate about helping the product-led community and companies fix their onboarding and retention as I am. They are the leading product onboarding and adoption platform for both web and for mobile apps, and they've created tons of resources to help this community. They've got the Product Adoption Academy, which is where you can get a free masterclass, like think courses, templates, examples, all the good stuff to help you break through your current plateaus and level up your product chops. I've got a course in there. It's my Value First onboarding course where I share the exact playbooks that my team used to help us onboard hundreds of thousands of new users. You can check out my course at appcues.com/value. That's appcues.com/value. And you can follow that link and explore all the different programs they've got inside of the Product Adoption Academy. Wow. Yeah. And then once you're in the game, you navigate around and eventually found your way into product marketing and went up from there. Cool. And so super interesting. And I want to double click on these tough moments here. And so can you tell us about a time when you struggled with a decision? Like what's the hardest decision you've had to make in their journey and sort of what was at stake for you as you navigate?
So I'm in this company. It's called Verafin. My total time at Verafin was like 3 and a bit years in total.
Which is a pretty good run.
And I'd started in sales, started as an AE.
And I just want to contextualize kind of the size and scale.
When I joined, it was 7, roughly. Like when I left, it was probably like 250.
Wow. Okay. So a pretty good run.
They were like the darling tech company in St. John's. So they had a great product. They basically had an anti-money laundering, anti-fraud software. They were selling it to banks and credit unions in Canada and the US. And they were crushing it. Like they were just all growing. Their product was best in the industry. Yeah, they were doing awesome. And so employing a lot of like young kind of tech people in St. John's, and they really were the ones to, St. John's, it's not like there was a ton of tech companies at the time, definitely not a lot of SaaS companies. They really kind of started that trend. And now there's like a big kind of startup ecosystem in St. John's. And I think like they're a big part of it. So anyways, awesome company and a great opportunity, right? Like you just kind of land in a company that everyone wants to work at. And especially people who were interested in what I was interested in and had the skills that I had and all that stuff. And so I had this opportunity where they were like, we're going to open a Toronto office. And so I'm in St. John's. I had spent a semester in Toronto, but that was about it. I'd never lived outside of St. John's, and that was my whole like support network. Everyone's in St. John's. And so I was like, all right, yeah, I'll do it.
And for those of us who don't know, how far away are we talking here? Like help us orient to the geography difference.
It's like, depending on which way you're going, but it's like 2.5, 3 hour flight.
So yeah, pretty far. I mean, fair to say. Yeah, pretty far.
You move to Vancouver from St. John's, it's still a flight, right? And you're moving to the big city sort of thing. You're moving from, a couple 100,000 people to like 10 million or something like that, like just a ton of people. big change, right? And there's this idea of like, hey, you can open the Toronto office, like help open the Toronto office. And me, young guy, early 20s, mid 20s ish, big opportunity. And it was like, all right, let's do it. Right? I didn't really think much about it and moved to Toronto and just kind of went up. And the day, so I was signing a lease around the same time they were signing a lease. So they had an office they were like signing a lease on. It was downtown Toronto. Really cool office.
And was your role still the same? Were you still an AE at this time, or had you transitioned into another team or a different role?
I think when I first started coming up, I was still an AE. So yeah. So like they had this lease that they were signing in this cool office downtown. I was like, hell yeah. I had found like a condo that was in Toronto, a cool spot in town, Liberty Village, like where all the young people were. And the day that I'd signed my lease, I got this, I think an email, or I went into this temporary office that we had. And they were like, yeah, they're trying to back out of the lease. They were like, no, they don't want to open up the office anymore.
Oh man. Oh.
And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I'm sure I probably could have like I don't know if I could have or not, gotten out of my lease, but I had a choice to make. I could have stayed in Toronto, hope for the best, or just went back home and kind of called it. But I was like, no, yeah, I'm going to stay.
Right. Because you've already made the mental commitment to being in this new, right? There's a lot that goes into that, to move a 2.5-hour flight away. Like I would imagine you've been thinking about this for months. You've thought through where your gym's going to be. You've scouted out the grocery store, right? This isn't like
you tell everyone you're moving to Toronto.
Right. You told all your friends and your family, right? You're not just going to be like, well, let me just go back home. You probably already.
And I've always had like the kind of mentality of like, I'll figure it out. Like I very much like have that kind of, I didn't worry too much about it. But luckily they got stuck in the lease. So they had to stay. The office had to stay. But I knew like pretty much writing was on the wall that they weren't going to grow this office. I think that was something they did.
And how many people were there with you?
So that's the thing. It was an office space, probably could fit 50 people. It never went past 6.
Oh God. Yeah. So it's just this big space with a couple of people. Probably felt kind of weird.
So it was weird. We had an amazing time, and it was like a good group that was there, but I don't think they're going to grow this office. Like, I don't think that there's an opportunity here by the time I decided to leave, I was in marketing and the rest were account executives, and the whole AE team was in St. John's. Everyone was like in St. John's, and we had this small group that was up in Toronto. And I kind of just said that, I could kind of tell I either needed to move back to Newfoundland and have a successful, to stay at the company. And I felt like I felt like that opportunity was there if I wanted it, or I could move on. And so the tough decision, took me a while to get to it, but the tough decision there was that I decided to leave. So I left a company that was paying me extremely well. It was a job that was awesome. The company was great. The product was awesome. And I decided to leave and go work at a friend's startup that paid way less, way more uncertain opportunity to learn. But I was like, I was with my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. And so we were together, and it was just like going from feeling like I always was making great money and always had money to now taking a big risk. And at the time, I don't think I weighed the risk. And I think that being naive at the time has probably helped me out, because I didn't weigh the risk of like, what might stock options be worth? Or like, what if I stay and I vest more? Or what if I stay and I get issued more stock options? And Verifone actually ended up getting acquired by NASDAQ, probably like 5 years ago, for like $2 billion.
No. Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Shortly after that acquisition happened, and I went home, like I was going out for like dinner with a couple of friends, and I could tell they like were hesitant to talk about it. But like one of them was like, yeah, like my dad wanted me to ask you, like, how you doing? Like, they thought I was like devastated that I hadn't stayed with this company, right? Because to everyone there, that was like the biggest, like that was a massive acquisition, right? Like life-changing amount of money for a lot of people that were in that company. And it wasn't like I never would needed to work again sort of thing. But if I'd stayed with that company and I kind of like saw it through, and I was there when it would have been a big payday, right? Like it would have been awesome. But I never regret it for a second.
Did you go through the exercise? Did you do the napkin math?
No, honestly, I didn't even try. No, but it was
for the best.
I still had a little bit. It wasn't like I had nothing to celebrate. Like, don't be getting to dollar amounts, but it wasn't like I was totally on the outside looking in, but could have been a lot bigger. But it was something where at the time I, even just talking about it with my wife, or even not, but the conversations you have with yourself, never regret it for a second. so much that like where I'm at now, obviously I have 3 children. I have a beautiful wife. Like I live in this great small town in Ontario. Like all those things obviously never would have happened. But even in my career alone, like what I learned every step after that and just kind of just being thrown out there and having to figure it out. And eventually like the Friends startup didn't work out. I had to go find a job. I went into a company, worked in CS, like just kind of crawled your way back up. So like no regrets.
And so you were there long enough that you did have options, right? You were there 3 years, or would you say close to 4 years? Right. So you had some options, but obviously could have vested in a different way. Maybe you'd get additional grants, things like that. That's what we're talking about here.
Like I said, if I was willing to like move back to Newfoundland, and there are some people who started in my cohort when I was, started at that company who are like heads of revenue, they're like VPs there, that sort of thing, where now that's obviously who's to say I could have failed totally, like 100%. Right. But I think like knowing, I don't know, my work ethic and that sort of thing, like I feel like it could have worked out.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the show. If you are, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening on. The data shows something like 40% of the people who listen to the show are actually subscribed. It is the best way for you to support the show, and it helps the algorithm find other listeners who are just like you. If you're feeling generous, a quick rating or review makes a huge difference as well. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. Now let's get back to this episode. I go through this with HubSpot, dude. I worked at HubSpot in 2011. I started when there was 200 people, which seems like a lot, but like half of the company had been hired within 4 or 5 months before I joined. Like they had just hit a big round of funding. They had really just hit product market fit. It was all systems go. So I was there from 200 people. When I left, there was like 2,000. They started to open up some of the international offices. And my biggest regret is probably not staying longer. Like it felt like the right thing to do at the time. I don't have regrets how it all shook out, but I've done the napkin math. And I know what it would have been worth had I stayed longer. I go through that often. And so I'm curious to know, like these learnings and this insight comes from years of perspective and additional experience and time and space to kind of work through stuff. But what would your advice be to someone who's listening to this, who's in it? They're working at a job. They're thinking about making a change, either for personal reasons or professional reasons, and they're just not sure if it's the right thing to do. What do you wish you knew, or what would your advice be to that person listening to this today?
So my advice to a person who's like in a similar situation?
Yeah, who's like, hey, I'm at this company. I think my run here is done, but I want to think through some of the trade-offs that I might be making before I go make a drastic leap in a change in my life.
At the time, I never thought of it like this, right? But I think this idea of if you're in your 20s, I don't think that in your 20s, you need to be like, necessarily need to be optimizing for an eventual kind of payday. Or you need to be saying, I need to stick around this company, even though I might not be learning anything, or I might not have opportunity for growth, because it might go. I think planning anything based on a company going public or having some like eventual payout is probably not wise, especially today. But I think like when you're young, I think that you need to really optimize for what are you going to learn? Like, how can you learn the most possible, right? How can you take risks, learn new things? I just think that if I look back, I would have told Jason to do the exact same thing back when he was doing it. I probably would have told him to do it sooner.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
Yeah, like you just can't be afraid at like what might happen in the future if some company ends up being a success or not. I think you've just got to plan. You can't rely on like what a company might do. You can only rely on what you're going to do. So if you know that like staying in this company is not going to help you progress at all, you're not going to learn anything new. You're not going to get to work with cool people, right? That's what you should be trying to do, is like learn, work with people who challenge you or people you can learn from. And eventually, if you focus on those things, then when you're, when you're older, like when you're, we're at the stage that we're at now, if you are still looking for those opportunities, it's going to be so much easier to find those. But I think at a young age, like trying to chase that stuff, I just don't think it's the advice I would give. So I would say like really try to look for the opportunities where you can learn, where you can work with great people, where you can work in products or spaces that you're interested in, and just worry less about how much money you're making.
If you worked at Verafin today, would you have made the same decision? Like, I know that you're on your own and happily on your own, right? But if you were working there at this stage of your life with 3 kids, would you make a different decision? Does your risk profile change? Does your decision-making process shift?
So if I put myself in a place where I have 3 children, I'm working at a company, and it's like at this kind of the early stage still, or potentially has the room to grow into a success.
Yeah, what I'm curious about is if what you optimize for changes, right? So what the thing that we're talking about is kind of grappling with being in a job where you're feeling like it's time to move on and do something different, right? The details can be different. Maybe you're just not motivated there. Maybe you feel the writing's on the wall. Maybe your pace of learning isn't as great. Or you're in a different chapter of your life. If that changes the way that you might make a decision.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. Like, I don't think if I was there now, it's, obviously like we're the type, you and I both have gone out and kind of chasing the thing that really interests us and we're passionate about, right? So if I was really in a position where you needed that steady paycheck or you needed that certainty, like maybe, but I've always kind of been more motivated by something that excites me in terms of a product or the company or the opportunity or just something entrepreneurial in general. It's never been motivated by this company that I think is going to be a success or this company that's going, yeah, like you had said earlier, right? You want to help. You don't want to just focus on making money for someone else or working for someone else's company. Now, that's just me personally, but like, I could totally see where it's a tough decision you got to make when you're someone who has a family and you need to support that family. And there's a great opportunity here, and it might not be the most exciting thing. You might not be doing work you love, but hey, it's like stable. And I think there's a lot of people who are probably in that spot right now, especially because some jobs are hard to find.
I think about it all the time. Obviously I'm on my own, but would I go back in-house for the right opportunity if it paid an insane amount of money and it meant kind of sucking it up for like 3-4 years, but maybe it changes the trajectory of my family? Yeah. I don't know. That's kind of what I was curious about. If you had an answer to that question. I don't have one, and I go back and forth on it.
I guess everyone has a price, so do I. You know what I mean? So if someone was like, hey, I'll pay you an insane amount of money, you just got to come work at our company. If they were like, you got to move somewhere that you don't want to move to, that'd be the deal breaker. Never say never, but it would take a lot.
All right. So you don't make that choice. You go on to work your way up the product marketing career ladder. So you end up director of product marketing at Uber, Flip, Clue, Chili Piper. Obviously now you're on your own. I'm curious to know, because I talk to a ton of folks who hit these moments where they think, fuck, I'm not on the right path. They get some tough feedback or there's a tough moment that kind of makes them question, like, they're even in the right career. Should they quit this tech thing? Should they pursue a different line of work? Have you ever had a moment like that in your journey?
Where I'm just like, hey, let's just F this. I'm getting out of sass sort of thing.
Yeah. If you just had like imposter syndrome or ever just questioned yourself, like, I'm starting to stack some wins. Yes, I've had a few title changes, had a few promotions on the way, but something's ever happened in that journey where you're like, I don't know if I'm meant to do this anymore.
Once I got into product marketing, I was like, yeah, this is meant for me. This sort of space, the skills that it takes to be good at this, through all the different things I'd done, I kind of like collected these skills that made me a great product marketer. But it's interesting, right? Because one of the things that I guess I've transitioned into is this idea of being a thought leader, like to use the word influencer, right? Like that a creator, like all these things. That was something I'd always liked the thought of it, but I never thought I was that. And if you had asked me like 5 years ago, would I be that? I'd have been like, probably not. Like I can't see me doing that, writing on LinkedIn all the time, doing podcasts, like going on webinars and stuff like that. Well, I remember when I joined Clue, one of the things joining Clue was Clue sold to product marketers. So they were looking for a product marketing leader who could kind of be that influencer, that thought leader, a person who could come in and be on the webinars, be on the podcast, write on LinkedIn all the time as like an extension of the brand. And very uncomfortable, this idea of doing that. But I pursued that job because it was a forcing function to do it. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I knew eventually I wanted to do what I'm doing now, like being an entrepreneur. But I saw like, hey, there's no way I'm going to get on LinkedIn and start writing unless it's part of my job. And that kind of fell into my lap. It was just through like a connection I had who connected me to Jason, and that opportunity was there.
Like, was this part of the early conversations was like, yes, we want someone to lead product marketing, but also evangelize a little bit?
Yeah. Jason was like, we want you on webinars, all that stuff. And so I was like, yeah, this makes sense. If I do this, then it's going to be part of my job. I have to become a thought leader, someone who's always on LinkedIn and in front of people. And I felt like it was, I felt imposter syndrome, right? That guy was like, no one cares what I have to say. I don't have a lot of value to offer. When it came to LinkedIn, I had maybe done some of the mandatory, the stuff you're obligated to do as the product marketer at, Uberflip or Chili Pepper, where you do the post on launch day sort of thing. But I'd never shared, like, came up with an idea or wrote something about it, created something and shared it on LinkedIn, right? Hadn't done that. And so I just definitely felt like imposter syndrome, but the way around it, like, I just tried to split those thoughts away from what was like, this is just work I have to do. So it helps me a lot when I have like a routine and I just break it down into this process that I need to do this thing. So every morning, 5:30, before the kids would wake up, I'd get up, make a coffee, turn on some music, sit in the living room on the couch. And that was LinkedIn time, responding to messages, DMs, sending connection requests, writing my post. And so I made a goal 3 to 4 times a week. I did that for better part of a year, right? And it was just through, I got Shield, I would look at my stats. Like, it just became this, I got pretty good at just doing the monotonous thing every day. And so what that kind of led into was just getting over the fear of posting and just putting yourself out there. And then I started to actually enjoy it. So I started to be like, hey, like, maybe I'll write it this way. I like sharing these ideas. I like coming up with these, like, infographics or these different things that I was creating. And you start to get feedback from people too. And so that was also like really motivating. But I think for me, I focused on what's the thing that I can bring to the table. So I'm not a fantastic writer. I didn't have a ton of past experience to pull from. I had some, but for me, it was, I can do things that take effort that people don't have time to do. And I can just share practical stuff. So I would share like practical tips on how to do different things. I made these like swipe files. Everyone wants a swipe file of inspiration, but no one wants to sit down and take 3 hours and collect all these examples. And so those are some of the things that I started to do to get traction. And as I got confident, I started going on webinars. You turn around like a year and a half later and I had an audience and I was able to launch a first digital product. And you could see that it was helping Clue. Deals would come in, people would reference stuff they'd seen me post. And so I was delivering on that side, like it was helping. I was doing the job I was hired to do, part of it. And then it put me in the position to go out and do this.
That's cool. That's pretty forward looking of them.
Yeah, I think so. I
feel like that's a thing that every year becomes just a little bit more popular, or maybe in the past it was kind of viewed as like maybe a distraction, or folks were nervous. It would look like a distraction from the real work, but actually making that into the JD, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. You don't see a lot like that these days.
And so you hadn't been doing this before you had started there. Take us back to that first week. It's 5 a.m. Kids are sleeping. What was going through your mind like the first couple of days when the cursor was blinking and the page was blank?
It's hard, man. Getting up and just staring at a blank page. I remember one of the first couple of posts I made, I was like, this is stupid. This sucks. It's just like, this is so dumb. Hey, and then sure enough, it gets like 5 likes and, like, no. And you're like, yeah, it was bad. The first couple of months, it's funny too to even look back at that stuff and be like, I would never do that, put that out now. And
do you remember what like your first 2 posts were? Like, do you still remember?
Oh, there was one I did. Well, one thing I did that was good was like, I keep it all in Notion. So I can go back. I don't know if I have my first post, but early on I started cataloging them all.
Oh, that's cool. You just do that manually?
Yeah, I use it to like plan my posting. So like I'll draft it in there and then I'll mark it as published, drop the link to the actual LinkedIn post in it. And so I have like this huge library, which is cool. But yeah, I remember I did this one where we had this like house cleaning service that we were trying out. They're called Organized Clean. And I think it was like some post about positioning and how they weren't just cleaning, they were also organizing, something like that. Anyways, and the image was just like a screenshot from their website or something, or maybe a paid Facebook post they'd done. But yeah, it didn't do well.
And did you feel weird? Because you're now in this role. Because I feel like for me, when I'm in a new role, I want to get a couple W's on the board. And I'm always in this position where I'm like, man, I want them to feel so great about the bet they made on me that this is the pressure that I put on myself. I don't mean to be projecting here, but I'm wondering, one, if any of that feels like it tracks, and two, if it does track, what goes through your mind when you're new, you're in this role, you start posting on LinkedIn. That's like a big part of why they hire you. And then the posts aren't doing well. Like, what are you thinking at that point?
It's interesting. I don't know. At the time, I was like, luckily, I was hired for another job too, which was actually doing product marketing.
Right. That was just part of the job.
I think luckily I wasn't coming in to replace someone who was like crushing it. And then they were like, all right, that person's gone, bring in Jason now. But at the time too, I think that, there was no one really who was like, I think it was at the time when I started writing, it was like Yoni Solomon, I think is his name. He's at G2. He was like the one person I was watching who was like posting about product marketing, but not many people were. So it wasn't like today you go on LinkedIn and there's like a million people posting about product marketing. It's so easy to look at them and be like, I'm not good enough. Wow, that's so good. Look at all the engagement there and all that. It's much harder. Like trying to start from scratch today, I would be tough because there's so much else out there to compare yourself to. Where at the time I was like, yeah, not many people talking about this. Product Marketing Alliance was out there doing their thing, but like it was kind of new territory. And so it's not like I had a lot to make me feel like I wasn't performing as good as X, Y, and Z. But yeah, there was never anyone in the company who was like, hey, I saw your post. Would really appreciate it if we got more.
No, I wasn't anticipating that, but more just the pressure that you put on your own self.
Of course. Yeah, but it's good because there wasn't any of that. I didn't feel the pressure. And I think that, again, it could have been a bit of just not thinking about it at the time, or maybe I did a really great job of just saying, hey, don't worry so much about the results. Worry about just like every day showing up, doing your 3 to 4 a week, and track the results to know how you're doing and all of that. And luckily things were like trending in the right direction, but it was like, track it, but don't worry so much about the result.
And what would be your advice to folks who are listening out there that are nervous to do stuff outside their comfort zone, whether it's sharing on LinkedIn or maybe starting to present at their first conference or being a part of podcast conversations, putting themselves out there and being vulnerable in different ways, who are nervous about it? What advice would you give to them?
Well, I always think practice. One, I would think pick a topic or pick a topic that you're really interested in. Because I get people who say this all the time where they're like, hey, I'd like to start writing about this, but I'm worried I don't really know, feel like imposter syndrome. And they're like, I don't know enough, or why should they listen to me? And I'm like, you don't have to be the person who knows everything. You can be the person who's trying to learn everything or trying to learn as much as they can. So you can write about, hey, here's what I learned about X, Y, and Z, or I'm on a mission to find out as much as I can about this, and here's what I learned this week. You don't need to always just say you're the expert, but it could be things that you're learning as you're trying to learn them. So I think that there's different angles that you can write content and like share stuff that is helpful and valuable to other people, but it doesn't require you having all this like historical knowledge that you're pulling from. But then the other thing is just practice. Like whenever I get on to, before I got onto this podcast, right? Like I'm sitting there, I'm looking at this thing and I'm just talking. I was like using the washroom today and I'm just talking to nobody, answering a question that I think I might get from you. You know what I mean? And I think that doing that, that's always been one thing where I'm like, I just need to, when I get on here and I'm about to tell this story, that it is as fresh and practiced as much as possible. Is it always perfect? No, but it's definitely puts me in a better spot where I'm way more confident than if I just winged it.
Hey, if you're enjoying the stories on this show and feeling like you're ready to tackle some of your own hurdles, I'm here to help. If you didn't know already, I offer one-to-one coaching specifically for people who work on or around growth teams who want to have a bigger influence and impact in their roles. Maybe you're navigating some tough moments, whether it's managing your team or handling feedback. Maybe you just want to step into a bigger leadership role. Or maybe you're at a unicorn company today and you want to make sure that the company doesn't outgrow your skill set. Either way, I can help. If you're interested in learning a little bit more, head to deliveringvalue.co/coaching to learn a little bit more and set up a call with me to see if we jive. All right, enough from me. Back to the episode. It's so interesting that you say that. I've done about 75 episodes of the show. Well, I've published 75, so I probably got another 4 or 5 in the hopper that have yet to be released. And what I've learned is that the best guests aren't like the most famous or the most accomplished. Well, sometimes it's the most famous, but there's not a correlation between great content and accomplishments, but there is a correlation between great content and someone who has reps at sharing their story. And so what I found is the folks who have built an audience are really the best guests. It's not because they have an audience and they share it. Like half the time they share, half the time they don't. That part's fine. But it's like they know how to talk about themselves in a way that's contextual for other folks. So that's not just all me, and they've got some reps that, of course, maybe the presentation they've polished a little bit as well. But it's really practicing how do I talk about myself and make it relatable and interesting for other folks who aren't me. And that's like a skill. So that's cool to hear that you do that as well. I think that shows.
Yeah. Well, thanks. It's funny, like the places you get most nervous when you're public speaking, it's like all hands meetings in companies. I would dread those. For some reason, I would always get super nervous.
Yeah.
And it could just be that you're speaking in front of your peers, that you're speaking in front of like,
me too,
whatever it is. I don't know. But there have been so many times where I feel like I'm just talking in circles in those things. And anyways, I just started practicing for them. So even if it was like a 5-minute talking spot, I would practice before I went in. And then I would just, so much easier.
I would do the same. Dude, I would record it. Way back in the day, like I would do it to Loom, or I do it. I worked at Wistia, so we used the Wistia product, which was Soapbox, but I think they've sunsetted that. So I'd use Soapbox. I'd record myself doing it. I'd play it back. And sometimes I'd do it again, depending what the stakes were. Totally. I used to think I was crazy for doing that. So that's cool that you do that too.
Yeah, you're not crazy.
And so I was going to ask if there's other examples in your life, work or non-work examples, because early in our conversation, you said, hey, when I encounter situations like this, where I feel imposter syndrome, or I feel nervous to do something, I just try to get the reps, and I try to force myself to do it anyways. And I set goals around the output, not the outcome, which I think is a great playbook for folks listening. And I'm curious if there's other examples or parallels in your life where you do that.
Yeah. Like fitness, trying to get like an elaborate workout plan, or like get to the gym, or eat well, or trying to have this like multifaceted kind of system set up for how you're going to be a healthy person. I just know it's not sustainable. Like I know I'm not the best person for that. Like I'm not going to get a bunch of apps, and I'm not going to be able to go on like MyFitnessPal and track my food and do all this stuff. And so about like last July, I basically was like, hey, I saw on Instagram, this guy had a PDF and it was like 20 garage style workouts. And you basically they were ones you could do with like one kettlebell and a couple of free weights. And I know doing 7-out workouts, working out every day of the week is not good for you. But I was like, I also know that if you do something for 30 days straight, you'll stick to doing it. And so I was like, I'm going to do one of these every day, nonstop. And I'm just going to go see as long as I can go. I think I got to 6 months and I had like missed like 3 days. But I knew for me that like getting up again, I swapped my LinkedIn time for just getting up and working out. And it was just, I get up, and these were, you could do them in like 20, 25 minutes. And then I do like a little jog around the neighborhood sort of thing. But in terms of like feeling fit and like getting in better shape, it was, it had a big difference, but it was just consistent. It was something I could stick to. And then after that, I didn't monitor my diet. So like, obviously I'm sure it's not perfect, but like for me, it was a huge change. It just meant that I needed to do the same thing and stick to a routine every day. And so, yeah, what I like, kind of a lot of similarities, what I did there with what I did with like posting on LinkedIn, for example.
So switching gears a little bit, I know you've had the opportunity to lead a bunch of different teams. So I'm curious if you're comfortable to share maybe one of the harder conversations that you've had as a team lead and what it was about.
Managing other people, I definitely think is one of my weaknesses.
It's hard, man. It's so hard.
It's like nothing puts me in my stomach in knots more than like tough conversations with other people. So I'm a people pleaser. What can I say? But
yeah, me too.
I had this one, probably the toughest was, and it was because there was so many different kind of angles to it. So there was someone I was reporting to me. One, they were having a tough time outside of work. So like personal life stuff. Yeah, there was stuff going on outside of work. There were also, they just weren't feeling appreciated. So they were asking for a raise. They were not feeling like their work they felt like they were working a ton and putting a ton of hours in, and that the work wasn't being recognized and appreciated. And then also though, the reality and what I was kind of seeing and what I was hearing from my boss and other people was that this person was also not performing at the level that was needed. It was really hard because what I learned through this whole process too is my style as a leader is referred to as like the hero. And I don't know the framework.
Is that like an Enneagram type of thing? Like, is that an outcome of an assessment?
All I remember is that I was referred to as the hero, and the hero is someone who is always on the side of the person that they manage. So I would hop on a call with this person, and they would say, this person here said X, Y, and Z. They don't appreciate what I'm doing. Like, they were having some like interpersonal challenges in the company. And my response is always, you're right. That person's being unreasonable, right? Like, I got you. Don't worry about it. But I know you're doing a great job, or I know you're working hard, all those things, right? Like, you are coming in to save the day. That was my style. And I think a lot of it is just me being afraid to have the tough conversations, right? So it's like the big thing that I had to work on in this and why it was so challenging. Luckily, I had some like HR partners in the company. I had a coach, a person who would coach me on like many things, being a leader, team leader, but this was a big one where it's like, hey, Jason, you are the hero, just so you know. Like, this is the way that you react to these situations. And it was just a matter of like, this was like a month and a half of just working through this. Like, it was like, over a period of multiple one-on-ones. I always felt like you go into the one-on-one, it would always be the same conversation. I feel like I'm ready for a raise. I feel like I'm ready for promotion. I feel like I'm not being appreciated. And me not really having the tough conversation of the like, we're actually not seeing what we want. So a lot of the coaching that I had was more around, how do I have the tough conversation of saying, right now, you're actually not at this level. You think you're here. You think you should be getting paid this much. You're not actually there yet. And this is what we need to see. And it sounds simple when I say it, but it was hard. Luckily, I haven't had to have a ton of these conversations. I've had a few, but man, it's not my favorite part of the job.
Well, I feel like one of the patterns that I've seen from my own journey working in tech is that you get promoted to being a manager because you're a good doer. You're the strongest IC, and usually those are the folks that get promoted. And then all of a sudden you're like the manager, but at least at early stage in small companies, there's no training with that. Like, if you went to HubSpot, if I had stayed at HubSpot and worked my way up the manager track, there was so much training and so much like new manager support, but like, I didn't stay in that world. And so every time I got promoted, I was like, fuck, I should like probably buy some books. And then you like buy these books, and then you're like, well, what do I do? I don't know how to handle these situations. Like, all of a sudden you're the boss and you're supposed to be able to know the answer and how to navigate all these weird interpersonal things that you've never encountered before. And that's crazy. And so is that part of why this is so challenging? Like, did you have any manager training as part of this?
They try to put some of these things in play, but I feel like a lot of manager training just ends up, it wasn't like I had hey, Jason, here's your one-on-one manager training right now, right? It was more like, luckily I had these people support me in this particular moment that I could go to and be like, this is my problem. I need your help. And they're like, we'll hop on a call. We'll talk you through it. And you're trying to like figure out, because you hop on a call, they might say something. You're like, I don't think that's right. Or I don't think that sounds, I remember having a couple. Right. I also was lucky I had my wife, and I would hop on after a call with them. I would like say something to my wife. My wife would be like, you can't say that. Like, duh. Now my wife's a great people manager. And so like, I've learned a lot, or like in those situations, I would do a lot of role playing with her too. And that was like a huge help. But yeah, I don't know how she got so good. Like, I think some people are maybe have it, and she's managed much bigger teams than I've had. And so it could just be through experience too, right? But I do feel like you can get a job. It's hard maybe in an interview to screen someone for how good a manager they are. And so then we're not really like motivated to be like, I've done manager training. Like, everyone says they're a great manager. You know what I mean? Like, everyone's like, yeah, I've managed teams before. Cool. Check. You're ready. Like, you can come in and do that. And it's more about, here's the, product marketing, the launches I've done, here's the revenue I've helped generate, like the growth goals we've hit, like all those things. It's harder to show proof that you're a good manager.
And sometimes being like, if you were to ask someone who you've managed, like, oh, is this a good manager? They might say yes, but your boss actually might say no. Cause like, what feels good for your team doesn't always mean you're doing the job right. And so that like also makes it tricky, where it's like the feedback is like all wonky.
Right. Like, if you're the hero, people love you. Jason's got my back. Like, he, cause you never have to have a tough conversation. So like, they like you, but then.
Dude, what's more preferable than the hero? So like, if being the hero in this example is probably your superpower in some parts of your life, but like maybe kryptonite in this one area, What's like a more preferable manager persona?
Oh, geez. I don't remember the names. Would have to look this up for you. But I do think that it's someone who is, even just looking at the skills, I just think it's someone who is able to, what is it? Radical candor. Like, I just think that that is, the whole idea of radical candor, where it's like coming from a place of caring, but being like honest and direct. And I think that it's something that takes guts to do, but I feel like it's one of those things where if you do it, and I'm not speaking from a place of experience, but it feels like it's one of those things where if you have the guts to come out and be totally like candid and have radical candor with people, but you also show that you care and they can see that you're coming from a place of caring, the people who work for you are still going to enjoy working for you. And they're going to like you even more because they're going to learn a ton and they're going to be better at the end of it for having you. And then I think in general, you're going to run better teams, but it's just like I think it's a very hard thing to do.
So the story that we're talking about, where you have to give feedback to the person on your team and you're struggling and they want to get the promotion, how does this story end?
I'll be honest, I don't think it ended with like the perfect solution. And I don't know if maybe that's the answer, like it never does. To be very specific, it was like, okay, we're going to take this promotion and salary increase conversation and we're going to move it to this date. And by that date, we need to see X, Y, and Z in order for you to, right? So it's like, here is everything that a senior XYZ would be doing. Here's the things you would be owning. Here are the results that we would see. If at that time you're doing that, then you'll get what you want. But we need to see these things between now and then, right? And it's, I think that I definitely know when we got to at least one of those milestones, still weren't there, right? So then you got to still have that conversation about like, we're not here yet. We're going to move it out a bit further. And the unfortunate thing is I do think at a certain point people just lose motivation. When I left the company, the person was still there and I'm not sure where it ended up. And it's tough to think like it never got to a solution, I guess.
Those kinds of things are really hard. I don't think there is a perfect outcome. That's why I was curious to know what was the outcome, because there isn't a good solution right there. These things are messy and there isn't necessarily a playbook for this. But it was interesting to hear you say sort of like the opposite of a PIP. It's like a more aspirational version of that, where you kind of get to take the emotion out of it, where you don't have to be the judge, you don't have to be the hero, and that you can just be the pragmatist and say, hey, here's kind of what we're talking about. Let me just lay it out. I'll support you in getting there. But it kind of puts the onus on the person to achieve those things kind of on their own terms with you supporting them, obviously, versus you saving the day.
This is the other thing too about, not trying to be the hero. It's like, I can't give you everything. And I felt like for me, it was tough in the moment too, because I'm like, I'm not working with this person enough. I'm not putting enough effort into working with them one-on-one. I'm too focused on these other, because I'm a player coach too, right? Like I'm too busy with my own stuff. I'm not putting enough time into them, and I'm not going to bat enough for them. Like when I go into a meeting with my boss, like maybe I'm like hanging them out to dry, right? Like there's all these things that go through my head too. All these like thoughts you have about like, you're not doing enough, or it's like, it's you who's wrong. There never is like a perfect, like you could have a tough conversation with someone and they could turn it around, but sometimes not everyone can. And then it's like, what do you do then? And that's an even tougher conversation too.
Yeah. Well, what's tricky is as a people pleaser, your goals are to keep the band together, right? Like you want to keep everybody on the team. You want to keep the team happy. You kind of want to keep the vibes high. But if you read books on managerial leverage, you probably did the right thing, which is if you read a book on managerial leverage, if you have 5 people on the team, in theory, you should spend the least time with the lowest performer because you get the least amount of outcome and the least amount of leverage from that. That doesn't feel good. That like goes against human nature to like lift others up and bring them along. And that's always the tension that I felt, where it's like, I read all the books. I knew what I should do. I just didn't know how to make myself feel the right way about it. So for me personally, I just tortured myself with stuff like that, where it just never really felt good. I'd like wake up thinking about it. Totally. I'd get feedback about someone on my team and like, it would like make my blood boil. It like felt like it was a judgment on me. And that's why I didn't like the job.
Now, it's any product marketers out there who are looking to be a manager of a team. It can be great. I just think that it's like one of the challenges of being a people manager. Yeah, you work with some people and you're like, you're an awesome people manager. And I do think a lot of it comes down to they can have tough conversations, right? And it doesn't weigh on them when they are in these situations. It's another part of the job. And that's not in a bad way, right? They're not like robots. It's just, they're good at it.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned some great resources, right? So if you're in a situation like this, find someone to do role plays with, find a coach, find a mentor. There's books you can read, but in my experience, you get the most amount of output from working with another human where you can bounce ideas off of and maybe role play a little bit. And so I love that that was part of your journey here. And just for the folks listening, just want to highlight that as well. Cool. And so what's something that you wish more startup tech leaders were honest about today?
I think sharing, just being honest about what they don't know. I don't know if I've ever had a conversation with a manager. Like in my roles, I've worked a lot with like CMOs, VPs of marketing and founders, like same with you, right? And it's very infrequent. I can't think of a time when you go into a meeting and you're talking about something and they're just like, man, I have no idea what we should do, right? Or just saying like, I'm totally stumped. It's always feels like they know the answer and you don't. And it leads to just like you're following their lead versus you're having this kind of open conversation about what should we do. I even have, as a business owner today, I can have a conversation with my wife and I can be like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And that's like a very healthy, it's a good conversation. And it usually leads to like a good discussion and that sort of thing. But like, I don't know if I've ever had that with people who reported in to me, right? And so I do wish that like leaders would just share when they don't know what the hell they're doing.
And for you at this point in your life and in your career, like what are your goals? So you've been on your own. How long have you been on your own?
2.
3 years?
2, just over 2.
2 years. And so what are your goals for this current chapter?
A little while ago, I picked up, like honestly, within the last month, I picked up the book Company of One, written by a guy named Paul Jarvis. And he created a product called Fathom Analytics, which I use. Anyways, I got onto his book and like the whole idea is it's not a company of one person per se, but it's like the mentality of staying small. And I think for me, sometimes I wonder like, when is enough? Like, what's the ceiling here? Or does it like, how high do I need to go until I'm happy and I'm just enjoying what I'm doing? And so it's kind of this trying to figure that out. And a little part of that comes to with like, can I focus on doing a few things really well where I'm able to get really efficient and just have a business that doesn't like take over your life, but you can have a great life. I'm definitely not looking to go, at least at this stage, like go any type of like VC route or raise any money and try to scale a company just for the sake of having to grow it. And so that's definitely something I'm thinking a lot about. And just this idea of like the long game. We're just surrounded by people who are just quickly getting to X and just seem like they're doing it so fast. And then it's like, what am I racing towards versus if I can just continue to do this for my career, like where will you end? Like what would it be by the end, right? Like does it need to all happen super fast and you need to like race to some finish line over the next 2 years versus how can I just play the long game? Those are like some of the things that I'm thinking of. How can I just show up consistently and just outlast everybody?
Yeah, the infinite game. Dude, I think about that too, man. When's enough? That's like a hard question to answer.
It is.
All right, one more question for you, which is for you building a business of one, well, one plus, because I know you've got your wife who's supporting the business.
And Eric on the Demo Dash side, it's not just one person.
So a small business, so without scaling a big team, how do you keep a little bit of distance between your personal identity and your business wins or losses? Like, how do you navigate the business isn't going well, but I'm not going to let it stress me out, the individual. I can still be a successful person in life, regardless of how my business is doing. How do you keep that perspective, or do you keep that perspective?
It's helpful when you've got children, you've got family, right? There's like things that pull you out of the grind where, even if I wanted to work all day, I couldn't because someone's going to come in your office and pull you out, back into the real world. And so I think like the way of just having other goals, other things that you care about. Like for me, it's having sports, right? Like we had basketball playoffs last week, right? Like just having other things we're involved in, I'm like a Beaver Scout leader and stuff like that. So just having something where no one around here knows what I do for work and they don't care, but they do care. Well, I don't think they care about basketball or Beavers either, but I think like, when you meet someone that they don't care what you do for work, that is one interesting thing about moving to a small town is like nobody has any interest in B2B SaaS. like they would in downtown Toronto or something like that. And I think that it's just nice. It's like the place we live now is like in the winter, it's big on skiing. In the summer, it's right next to a lake and it's just big on like outdoor stuff. And it's like a constant reminder of, you step outside and you realize there's a lot more to it than just the work you're doing here. So that's why I think more about this stuff of, when's enough and how do I just do this long term and don't try to, burn out by trying to just have this growth goal for the sake of it. Right. So it hasn't been too bad, but at the same time, I'll say there are days where it's like a rough day. You don't know where things are going and it's hard to focus on anything else because you're deep in it. It's like hard to come back and be present with your family and stuff because of something that happened with work. I'm sure you have it.
Yeah, of course. And for folks listening who are interested in B2B SaaS, that want to learn more about you or connect with you or potentially work with you, see what you're up to, where should we send them?
One place to go, I'd say go to productivepmm.com. I have a newsletter I write. It's called PMM Files. We share practical examples of great product marketing, and we share some of the, cool examples of like thought leadership content and stuff we find throughout the week. And yeah, subscribe to that.
Put a link to that in the show notes. Jason, thanks for coming on, dude. Appreciate the game.
Thanks, Andrew. This is great, man. Thanks for having me.